I just thought I would introduce myself and tell you why I think that GDP is so important. First of all, I am a vet. I'm an elected member of Royal College Council, and currently I'm Chair of Education at Royal College. I've been qualified more than 30 years, and so I have been a vet now most of my life. And during that time, I have been bitten, scratched, pooed and weed on numerous occasions. But despite that, I still think it's the best profession in the world. And we're looking forward to you lot joining us, hopefully, later on this year. I can, though, vividly remember my first months in practice, because when I qualified, and I say it's a long time ago now, it was very much a sink or swim type of attitude. And I will confess that I used to hide in the toilet during busy evening surgeries to avoid seeing difficult clients. Hopefully, that's not something you guys are going to have to do. We know how much blood, sweat and tears has gone into getting you to this point in your course, especially this year with all the challenges that we face around the pandemic. And after all that work, college want to continue to support you after you qualify, so you can become the best possible vet you can, whichever arm of the profession you go into. And the VetGDP has been designed to make that transition from a graduate to a confident, competent, resilient vet as smooth as possible. So as I say, you don't have to go and hide in the toilets like I do during difficult consultations. Linda's going to give you much more detail, but I can tell you at this point, we've had massive engagement from the profession. We've been absolutely delighted that we've had responses from both the corporate and the independent sectors of the profession. And what VetGDP does, of course, it creates a level playing field, so any vet in any practice can provide appropriate training for a new graduate. And what that does, it gives you choice when it comes to deciding on your career path. So without further ado, I'm going to get the Royal College staff to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to leave the floor to Linda. So in no particular order, Emma.
Hi, I'm Emma Lockley and work in the communications department.
Thank you, Emma. And Jo, who's going to take the questions and give those later. Jo?
Hi, I'm Jo Stetzel. I've been leading communications for VetGDP.
Thank you, Jo. And finally, Linda.
Hi everyone, I'm Linda Prescott-Clements. I'm Director of Education at RCVS. Nice to be here. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an overview of the things we're going to cover today, we're going to start with some context. I thought it might be really helpful to tell you a bit about the background and where this has come from, and the consultation that we held with the profession to make sure that we get this right, and the feedback that gave us. And then we'll move to the programme itself and talk a little bit about the aims of VetGDP, how it's going to work in practice and for yourselves, and then look at some of the roles. So the VetGDP advisors who will be supporting you, and approved practice workplaces, and a little bit about quality assurance as well. So the RCVS introduced the professional development phase, the PDP, for new graduates in 2007. Which had the aim of supporting new graduates as they go into their first role. And this was based on a long list of year one competencies, which are essentially derived from the day one competencies. And in that process, graduates are encouraged to find their own mentor in practice to support them. It's based on self-assessment of your progress against these year one competencies. And the link with the RCVS is from one of our PDP deans, who will provide a support over email. So about 10 years after it was introduced, we commissioned a formal evaluation with input from stakeholders, including employers and graduates, because we had sort of informal feedback at that point that it perhaps wasn't working as we'd wanted it to, and it wasn't achieving its aims. So, and the headlines from that evaluation confirmed this really. It was, unfortunately, PDP was considered by employers and graduates to be a tick box exercise. And also the availability and the quality of mentorship was highly variable. So some graduates did manage to find mentors in practice that would support them through the PDP, but many couldn't, or they had an assigned mentor but then didn't actually get the support they needed. The year one competencies weren't always relevant to every role, so it was a case of one size does not fit all. But what we did find out is that graduates do want and would value support in their transition into the first role. It's just that the PDP wasn't achieving that, and it needs to be better structured. It needs to be relevant to the individual and meaningful to them as well. So on that basis, and the strength of the feedback that we got in this evaluation really indicated to us that it wasn't about updating the PDP or tinkering around the edges. Actually, what we needed to develop was a whole new programme. And at that point, so we decided, right, we need to consult. If the PDP isn't working, we need to know what we need to do when we develop this in order to make it work and be meaningful for new graduates. And then came the graduate outcomes consultation, which was our opportunity to do that. And this was the most important review of veterinary education that RCVS has done in over 20 years. And we really wanted to find out what good looks like in a number of areas in education, but particularly one of those main areas was how best to follow the PDP and how to develop a new programme for graduates. We had an amazing response rate from the profession. This really wasn't a short questionnaire. This took a lot of time for people to complete and give us their feedback. And we had over 5,500 responses from individual members of the profession, and also 38 organisational responses, which I think just demonstrates how important this issue is, but it also shows you how much information we got that we could then use to develop the VetGDP. So the headlines from the consultation in what would work in a programme really are these. So number one, there was appetite for radical change. They wanted the RCVS to be brave. They wanted us to move completely away from anything that could resemble a tick box exercise. There needed to be support for graduates in their working environment. There needed to be some kind of structure to support the development across the programme, but it needed to be flexible, responding to different roles so that you could make it your own, because not everybody goes into the exact same role. There needed to be some clarity on the interventions and descriptions around those. And as part of the consultation, we asked two very specific questions. Should the RCVS have a role in accrediting practices to deliver this programme? And should the RCVS have a role in quality assuring the programme? And the majority of the profession supported that and felt that we should. So from that, it was clear that we needed a completely new programme, which is now the VetGDP. It needs to be meaningful, it needs to be personal and be flexible to be adapted to each individual. And it needs to be holistic so that it's directly relevant to your role as that progresses. Just before we move on to talk about the practicalities of the programme, I just wanted to add this context as well. So one of the main reasons this is so important is that we know the veterinary profession has one of the highest attrition rates of the health professions in the UK, which is incredibly sad when people work so hard at vet school and then some end up leaving within 7 or so years of starting their role. And we know from the survey of the professions that the RCV runs every few years that perceived levels of support in practice, it could be one contributing factor. And from the last survey we did in 2019, we did some deep dive into the data actually, and it was statistically significant that graduates felt that where they were truly supported in their role, they were much more likely to remain in the profession. And as well as remaining in the profession, what we're aiming for is that they remain in that practice more likely as well. So that is one of the underpinning aims if we make a success of the VetGDP. So the aims are to provide consistent, meaningful and personalised support for you as you enter the profession, excuse me, to further develop your competence beyond the day one skills and competence that you will all have at graduation, but into fully independent, experienced practitioners that can really deal with anything that comes through the door. To enhance your confidence and ability to reflect and recognise the strengths, recognise your things you're really good at, as well as areas where you could benefit from more experience or development. If we just go talk about a little bit about the structure of VetGDP. So it is structured around real practice. It's around your job, whatever that may be, your specific role. Excuse me, one second. So the structure we have is based around what's called entrustable professional activities, or EPAs. We're using these, that they're well used already in other health professions, particularly in medicine. They're often used in different contexts, and they're very high level. So what they are not is another list of individual competencies, because what we don't want, whenever you present a list of something, the temptation is to tick it off. So, and we want to move away from a tick box exercise. So the idea of the programme is to help you progress from the individual day one competencies that you have already when you enter, into actually covering a full range of contexts for each of the activities in your role. So it may be that for a very simple case, you're absolutely day one competent, you go into practice, but then as you get more experience, it might be that there's more case complexity, or it might be different species, or it might be less client cooperation. It's all these additional contexts that you will benefit from more experience as you go through the programme. So in medicine, these are used, the word entrustable is around independent practice, and I just wanted to reassure that is not how we are using them. Entrustable in our sense means when you've reached the point where you feel able to deal with any type of activity that comes through the door without any support, and your VetGDP advisor feels the same way. So we have developed a bank of these high-level EPAs, and I say a bank, they are extremely high level, and I'll give you an example of one so that you can see that. And so I think there's around 15 in the bank, and those 15 will be relevant to the majority of roles. However, I do want to stress that these EPAs are there to provide a structure if and how it's useful. If there's part of your role, there's activities that you do that aren't covered by the EPAs, there's a template that you can develop your own, and we'll support you in doing that. And your portfolio that your programme is revolved around is about the activities of your role. So the EPAs are intended to be helpful, but you shouldn't pin everything on an EPA. It's not about ticking those off. And these can be used differently at undergraduate level, so that it's really important that you realise that. So at the start of your programme, you and your VetGDP advisor will identify the activities relevant to your role, and each of these will essentially be a chapter in your e-portfolio that you'll progress through the programme. There are no scores, there are no tick boxes or numbers. It's a completely qualitative approach so that you can make it meaningful to you. And it's about how you progress with the support of your advisor towards that fully independent, confident practitioner that really can deal with anything that comes through the door in terms of that activity, unsupported. So this is part of the guidance that we're developing, just to give you an idea of how the programme fits together. So as you see at the top, so once you've agreed the activities that are in the role that you've just gone into, these will then become the sections within your e-portfolio. And really the programme is just you doing your job, but getting support, advice, guidance, and being able to reflect on those activities as you do your job. It's not putting anything additional in there. So in terms of what type of support you can expect from your VetGDP advisor, so it's obviously coaching and mentoring, but specific things like helping you set feasible goals. We think observation and feedback will be really, really important, particularly in the early stages of your programme. That will give you the benchmark then to use against your own reflections to see where your strengths are as well as your areas for development. You might want to ask for supervision for particularly challenging cases that are coming up, if that would help you. You might want to ask for advice about a complex case that's coming up, or have a debrief after a case that perhaps something didn't go quite right and you want the advice from your advisor. Guided reflection discussions, and we're also recommending monthly progress reviews, but that's more based around all of the activities, having an overview of looking at your progress against all the activities in your role, rather than the other types of support, which will more generally be about a specific activity that you request from your advisor, because you're the best person to know which areas you feel more confident in and which areas you've had more or less experience in. So this is one of the EPAs, just to give you an idea really, and reassure you what I mean by it is very high level. So EPA 2 in the bank is about developing diagnostic plans and interpreting test results. So when I say this will be a chapter in your portfolio, if this is relevant to, if this is one of the activities that you do in your new job. And in terms of moving through the program and showing your progress, the context that I mentioned, so the success criteria there, are the different presentations under that banner of that activity. So it's across different animal species, being able to develop a diagnostic plan and interpret test results for different clinical presentations, acute chronic conditions, different case complexities, data ambiguity, etc., etc. And so this is also in our guidance. Actually, all of the portfolio and the forms will be online. So this is just to try and give you an idea of the type of information you're getting. You won't actually have forms like this to fill in. But when you reflect on an activity or a case that's come through, you'll identify which EPA or EPAs it was relevant to, so that it goes into that chapter of your portfolio and you can monitor your progress. You might collect the types of professional skills that were involved, a little bit more detail about the activity, so that when you look back, you can see any specific elements, things like case complexity, species, and client cooperation. But the main parts are the reflections. So to look at which areas of that activity were particularly challenging, which areas you thought you did really well, and areas for further development as well. And these kind of fields and information will be the same ones that your advisor will collect if they're providing observation and feedback, which will therefore you'll be able to compare your own thoughts on strengths and challenges as well to those of your advisor. I mentioned that we'd be looking at monthly progress meetings, and they're more about looking across all the activities, all the EPAs in your role. And again, this is just a visual to give you an idea of where we're looking at. So for each EPA, we're looking to move you from day one competent, which you will all be when you start your role, moving it across to when you're fully independent, competent, confident practitioner, no matter what comes through the door. So no matter the case complexity or the client cooperation or all of those other contextual factors. So I've mentioned the portfolio a few times, so that's currently under development, specifically for this programme. I'm aware as students, not many of you might be aware of our One CPD recording portal that's available for vets across the UK already, but this has received immense support and positive feedback from the profession as being a real game changer in being intuitive and making recording their CPD and the reflections on CPD much quicker and easier. And as part of that is that we have it as an app on a phone. So I think there's a misconception that to reflect on an activity, you have to sit down, usually after hours, and start writing a small essay. And that is not the case. So you can write text on the app to reflect, but equally you can record audio on your mobile phone and press a button, and that will automatically upload it to your e-portfolio. Or you can take a photo of a case report or something else and upload that to your portfolio. So VetGDP, the recording platform, will be similar. It's based around the same functionality. The platform will be available this summer, the app may take a little longer, but when you start your programme this summer, certainly the recording platform will be available. So completing the programme, we haven't set a time period for the programme, but we envisage, just from what we know about PDP, that it probably for most will be around a year. However, it may be longer than a year, particularly if you change practice or something happens, or it may be shorter than a year. So there is no set time limit. As you progress, we think that you will probably be requesting different types of support, or perhaps less one-to-one observation and feedback as you get your confidence and develop more experience. But at the point when both you and your VetGDP advisor feel that you've developed your practice and confidence across all the activities in your role, then you can submit the portfolio to our CVS, which will trigger a peer review and sign-off process. Hosting VetGDP, so the vision is that workplaces will need to have a trained VetGDP advisor in order to become an RCVS approved graduate development practice or workplace. This isn't just about clinical practice. VetGDP advisors need to complete an e-learning package and commit to providing you with support. And this really ensures that all advisors understand exactly how the programme works and what best practices in how best to provide different types of support to you. What I will say, it's really important that this year we are rolling out the programme, and we recognise there is also a pandemic on, which makes it extra challenging for practices. So what we're looking for this year is for practices to have somebody signed up and start and be engaging with the training to become a VetGDP advisor, and they would certainly need to complete it by the end of the year. But as we're rolling the programme out, they wouldn't have to have necessarily completed the e-learning package by the time you start your programme. They would certainly need to commit to providing you with support from the beginning of the programme though. And I'm really pleased to say we've had massive engagement and real positivity from the profession on this. And I think Joe will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's still only 8 weeks since we actually launched this. And we have, as of about an hour ago, 1,242 vets have registered their interest to become VetGDP advisors and take on this training. I think there's just over 1,000 graduates expected across the UK this year. So that is really, really encouraging, and there's going to be plenty to go around. They're located throughout all of the 4 nations, even in the Scottish Highlands and the Channel Islands, etc. And on average, they have around 15 years on the register. But any vet who has more than 3 years on the register is eligible to become a VetGDP advisor. And the online training is under development now and will be available from the beginning of April. So we're hoping that the majority of VetGDP advisors certainly will be nearing completion of this training by the time you start your programme. But like I say, they do have until the end of the year if needs be. But when you're job hunting, ultimately, we're hoping graduates will look out for the practices that have been accredited and are an RCVS approved graduate development practice or workplace. For this year, if they're intending to become one, that is absolutely fine. We're looking for engagement, we're looking for people to sign up. When they do become an approved practice, they may display this on a website, on job adverts and other channels. However, for this year, there'll be many practices signed up that won't have completed the training yet, but will still be eligible. So don't worry if you don't see the actual logo for VetGDP this year. The thing to do is to have a conversation with them, ask them if they've signed up, ask them if they've heard about the programme. Even if they haven't signed up, ask them if they're willing to, and as long as they do that before the start and engage with the training, that will be absolutely fine.
So on that very positive note, we hope that you all are safe and well, and we wish you all the very best of luck in your exams later on this year. We look forward to welcoming you to our profession later on, and remember, if you have any problems or concerns, The college is there for you, so don't hesitate to reach out and we'll have to help if we can. So good night, everybody.